well, let's put it this way. I'm okay now, but I did have a little bit return of my, let's sort of say a legacy of Wednesday night. Anyway, sorry I'm late, but trust me, you didn't want to see where I was to broadcast from. You really didn't want to see that. None of you wanted to see that. So, hello everyone! Yes, I have walked a fluffy research assistant and the assistant fluffy researcher, and thank you, Jack Ray, for the 10 memberships. Thank you. It's very kind of you. You got 15 questions, 968 everyone. That's good, because I only got 4 books today, because the 2 books which were supposed to be delivered haven't arrived. And honestly, I've read the 4 books this week, and I've sorted all them out, and I'm happy with them, but I haven't had time to go and read any more of books, because honestly, most of the time, I'm not sure if anyone else has dogs like mine, but and I won't ask people to do a poll about whether it happens, but my dogs are very much of the view that you should never go to the loo alone. You should never go to the loo alone, and also of the view that they should actually be sitting in my lap while I'm going to the loo, which I personally am trying to train them out of, but my mother and sister find incredibly amusing. So yeah. That was the last the last few days, and today I had a little bit of a return, but I'm back. I'm fine. I got back from walking the dogs. It was all okay, and then hence we delayed the start. So apologies, and probably too much information, but you know, it's been that kind of week. At least this isn't last Sunday, because if it had been last Sunday, that would have been really annoying, because last Sunday was my birthday. But, yeah. Right then. 96831, Michael Cooch. Hello, Tash T. Rochelle. Hello, John Shea. Hello, George Newman. Hello, Byron Newman. Hello, Jack Ray. No, where are we going this time? Is this 50s or 1999? Okay. Not quite. Not quite. Actually, no result to bribery. Had to access a TARDIS. What period of history, specific year, would he go back to study? Oh, good lord. If I had access to a TARDIS, when would I go back to study? Okay, familiarly wise, I would really like to go back to about 1066 and figure out which side of the Battle of Hastings my family actually fought on, because we're not quite sure. We know we were on the winning side at the end of the battle, but no one's quite sure where we started the battle, if you know what I mean. So that one would be that's the family personal one. It's always lovely when you know your family were involved in the battle. You know they're on the winning side at the end, but don't think they're on the winning side. They're on that side at the beginning. But it takes skill to change. I presume they're probably fighting as mercenaries to change employer halfway through a battle. It really does. We'll leave that to one side. That it could just be entirely family mythology about that one, and they might not have been there at all. So that's the family personal one. Let's see. If I wanted to have a stellar academic career, I would have to go back to an Age of Sail battle, which we don't know much about, and study it thoroughly. If I wanted to make Drakenafel very, very happy, I'd have to go back to about 1915, 1916, and steal, or at least copy, all the designs of dreadnoughts out of the Brescia, out of the Admiralty, out of the constructors. If I wanted to make myself very happy, I would probably go back to about 1937, have a chat with the lovely Admiral Reginald Henderson, and basically go, so I want to talk about all this stuff, but I also want to emphasize 4.5-inch dual purpose. 4.5-inch dual purpose, or maybe make the 4%-inch dual purpose. I don't care, but they need to be a dual purpose mount on those destroyers. And, oh, by the way, you're going to want your air group to have at least 24 fighters. per carrier. So start factoring in 24 fighters and your strike group of 36, and that's your 60 aircraft air group. And fine, then that's what you've got to design the illustrious class, etc. around. And you might well need to go to the full 25,000 tons for that, which they could have done. Honestly, they could have got. They had a few extra thousand tons. They could a couple of thousand tons they could have played with, and that would have probably given them the space. That and deck edge lifts, because if they'd gone for deck edge lifts, even without an expensive, massive hangar, but still gone to the hangar side, but just have sort of a flow through deck edge lifts on the illustrious class, they would probably have had the space to up their air group to 24 fighters and 36 strike aircraft on hangar capacity alone, and that would have changed. That would have changed World War II dramatically, and I mean absolutely dramatically. Because you're only talking about an extra capacity of 12 aircraft, and if you think about it, once you no longer have the lifts in there, and the space the lifts take up at either end, and you then have the space that you would have going back to the lifts on the deck edge, and probably a little bit length, etc., from the couple of thousand tons, you would easily have the capacity for another 12 aircraft. And it would be your 24 fighters and your 36 strike aircraft, which would probably be Swordfish. Let's be honest, it would probably be Swordfish and fighter. If they're going for a fighter and picking a fighter at that time, I'd probably tell them to go with the thing which the lovely Royal Air Force doesn't really want. I'd tell them to try and get a navalised version of the Hurricane. Because you could actually make a navalised version of the Hurricane a lot easier than you can the Spitfire. It's a far, far more rugged airframe. So that's my answer to Michael Cooch's question. Thank you for the 10 memberships again. It was a 15-minute delay for me to use the facilities, as I explained. Thank you, Byron Newman, Steve Clarke, Felix B, Michael Patton, Constantinopolis, Alistair Shaw, Peter Dawson, Sean Brennan, and Ollie, and a History Vanguard. Okay, hello, Tanafaka. Hello, Seneca Nero. Hello, Calvin Gasberg. Hello, Tasha Rochelle. Make sure I toggle the timestamps. I need them. Hello, Nona. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, George. Hello, Rapid Raceback. Hello, Steve Clarke. I think I said hello, Steve. Oh, not. Hi, DG40. Hi, Stafford. Hello, Amelia. Nice hearing. Would it be correct to say that what the Americans wanted out of Treaty of Versailles was the end of the colonial empires was simply a no-go at the time? Yeah. It wasn't going to happen after World War One. It just wasn't. Hi, John Luke. Because the colonial empires weren't considered the reason for the war in Europe. Because the war had been pretty much everywhere but the colonies. The colonies, there had been some colonial warfare, and actually in reality, but in terms of public perception and political perception, the colonial wars had been minuscule. Hi, John Mates. Hi, thanks. Stephen Richards, that does sound cool. Thursday, aboard Belfast with your 3-year-old grandson. George Newman, I think my family might have had lines on both sides of the Hastings. That is the other option, that they divided the family in two, and one half were theoretically fighting for Harold, and one half were theoretically fighting for William. And then when they saw the way the battle was going, it's just magically they merged into each other. And all happened to be on side which was won. That's always an option with my family. They're incredibly practical. Jack Ray, I thought that the employer change during or right around battles was common enough during battles. It was very common before battles, not usually during the battle. I was going to say the naval battle of Remshad, which no one knows what happened. Oh, that would have been fun. Yeah, Jack Ray, I would go forward, get a universal translation to pass. The point was, I think Makuch said TARDIS, and the TARDIS has a universal translator built into it. It looks after its crew. So that would be okay. For Wayne, yes, honestly, from an anthropological point of view, if I was an anthropologist, going back to Africa about 300,000 years ago, there would be some very interesting things going on there. But I would say, honestly, considering the amount of myths I hear about 11,000 to 12,000 years ago in Africa, I probably want to do that as well. True, George. I could steal the Dreadnought designs, copy them, and put them back before anyone knew what they'd gone. I could also start editing the Dreadnought designs. Let's be honest. HMS Dreadnought would get built, but would have five triple 14-inch turrets. The world. HMS Renown will be built with 9 15-inch guns. I'm warning Henderson about his health. I could try, but seeing as my theory is pretty much he managed to work himself to death, I don't think anything I can do is going to prevent that. Maybe if I can take back some sort of, I don't know, personal fuss. I could, of course, just take Dan back and just glue Dan to Henderson's side and go daily medicals. Here's all the modern facilities, daily medicals. But it doesn't. Would also be better if the aircraft carriers had a higher hangar ceiling. It would, but doing that with when you're putting the armor flight deck, you need to. If you're making a bigger carrier, you could probably do that. If slightly bigger anyway, you could probably do that anyway because you just sort of you'd have more space in the hull, so you could move stuff around. But there is still the point of how much weight are you putting high up in the ship and creating stability. That's right. Wouldn't it be more far more sensible that Chamberlain not try to appease Nazi Germany and treat them as a threat they should have been in pre-1939 years? It would be interesting to do that, but the reality is the reason Chamberlain's treating them, trying to appease them, is to try and buy time for rearmament. This is the whole thing. Appeasement is about buying time for rearmament. It's nothing else. And you can argue that actually Britain and France were actually in a better position in 1938-37 than they were in 1939 and 1940 vis-a-vis the Germans, and you would be, to an extent, correct. But you'd also be doing that they didn't feel in a better position, and the psychology is going to be part of it. I could also go to Norway and actually warn them about the invasion, and that would change the entirety of World War II. I would go to the Battle of Trafalgar and get the Battle of Trafalgar and get some drone footage. That'd be cool. Hi, Daphne. Dan, stop being cruel to Seneca. Alfred B228, in your opinion, when naming a space-based military force of actually ships, can you call it a navy or do you need to use something like Starfleet or Space Force? I would call it a navy. I would. Will the Ottoman Empire, Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian empires are already finished. The French, Italian empires are in trouble. The growing Japanese Empire and British Empire will need the Second World War to do them in. John Luke, and Dr. Clarke, I have been offered a first-time history teaching job, 18 plus years old, overseas. What advice would you give to making it interesting for students? Well, whenever I've done it, and even when I've done sort of summer camps and things like that, I always try and introduce them to as much archival research as possible. I always try to get them as close to primary sources as possible. So it's not always reading it filtered through what other people have said. So as much primary source access as I can, as much primary material as I can put in there to make it as close to the history as it can be. And that usually works pretty well. That and everyone likes a quiz. Everyone always seems to like a quiz. I have no idea why, but quiz, especially multiple choice quizzes, tend to be really popular. Moving on. Warspite's MS in 1930 HMS Gurkha, crewed by veteran Gurkhas and captained by Vian for the ultimate. We can control this ship, so we just we can't point at the enemy. Warspite's machine spirit in 1930s HMS Gurkha, crewed by veteran Gurkhas and captained by Vian for the ultimate. We can't control the ship, so we just point at the enemy ship. Let's be honest, Warspite's always been that. As I was doing the Battle of Quiberon Bay the other day, and it's a case of the Battle of Quiberon Bay started by Warspite fires her cannon. The captain doesn't give an order. The crew claim they didn't fire the cannon, but the cannon go off. They hit the French. Yeah. But here's the thing, and it's an actual question for you. If it's an age of sail, ship of the line, can we describe it as having a machine spirit? Can we? Is it a spirit of the trees? Is it a spirit of something? What's it? Can we describe an age of sail ship of the line, i.e. a wooden sailing ship, as having a machine spirit? The Renal with 9.15 inch. Yes, I would change. The British standard practice would change immediately from producing twin turreted battleships and capital ships to all of them being triple turreted, and that would change the whole thing. Admittedly, though, that might then introduce. Let's be honest. Let's think about it. In a world where the British are standard producing battleships with 15 guns. Okay, because think about it. All the ones which come after the Dreadnought, up until include, and then the Orions and all the Iron Dukes, etc., have 5 turrets. So if they all had triple turrets with 15-inch guns, how many guns would the Americans have to put on their battleships to feel happy? Because the Americans usually go for a speed disadvantage, firepower advantage on their ships. So if the British battleships and capital ships all have 15 guns, how many guns are the US Navy putting on theirs? Alex Heading Fisher's design department. Oh, crud. Warship design makes manical gravity. Heck, Renown probably would have 9 18-inch 42s. 42s? I'd have 9 18-inch 48s. Oh, no, hang on. You could have an 18-inch 50. You could have an 18-inch 50. Imagine the fun you could have with an 18-inch 50. Dr. Clarke, you mentioned once that the Home Guard Model 2 was composed of traumatized World War I veterans and the Army watched them carefully. Was there similar concern about World War II vets in the Cold War? Let's put it this way. In the Cold War, World War II vets were never formed into a Home Guard. But there was some worry about what some of them might do in the reserves. There's only one place to be, aboard Rodney while taking out the visit. No, there is one place to be before that. In the design rooms when they're designing Rodney and Nelson and Rodney and going, 28 knots! Make them 28 knots! And then the world changes. Actually, what conspiracy theories do you hate? I hate the one about the DC-8, the C-6B airline that crashed in Congo in 1961 and was shot down. When all facts evidence say the pilots mucked up the approach. There are just so many. Oh, good lord. It's, the one I had the most fun with at the moment is some of the stuff. You see, there is some intelligent and interesting debate going on about various things to do with Egyptology at the moment. And there is some genuine debate. And I have some colleagues who are really good Egyptologists. Nigel, my agent at Past Preservers, that's the company which reps me for TV work, etc. He's an Egyptologist, and a really good one. And so I know a passing amount about Egyptology because of that, and because of chatting with them and because they're interested, I go and look it up and get the books out. I know enough to know there are some debates going on. But I also know enough to know that There are some really, really wackadoodle people who like to put out theories for Egyptology. And they come up in the shorts and Instagram feeds. And you just go, oh, because I'm interested in history, I've got to watch this. Skip. 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 Oh. Now, there is some good stuff. There is some strange stuff. There's also some discussions which are really quite cool. But yeah, history. Although I have to say my favourite one was that the Chinese treasure fleets were just about giving out gifts. Well, they were treasure fleets. They were going out and they were giving gifts. No, they were about establishing trade connections and and Chinese preeminence. They were giving out gifts as part of their diplomacy, but that's a common part of diplomacy. They're not going out giving out gifts from the goodness of their hearts. They have a reason for it, and that doesn't make them bad or nasty. It just makes them diplomats. And the amount of times that one's been coming up recently, I've been going, no, no, no. Get your ahistorical twaddle away from me. Be gone. There it is. Ah, there's my water. So. I'm blaming the ship's captain. Yes, sailing ships were complex machines. Possibly. I just say oh, the ship of line is a war machine. So yes, it's a machine spirit. Reference. I'm reading Cunningham's memoir. I always said... I always read World War II just happened on September 1st. He talks about preceding months of tension, preceding... Where else would I look for pre-war background? There's tons. There's whole books about the build-up to World War II. And the fact is, it does go on for months. It's one of the... I got the comment from you, and I just got to going... I think I've talked about that on this channel. The fact that it was most definitely known it was coming, and there was tension. And there's plans, and the Royal Navy's pushing in. And there's real efforts being made to finish off ships quickly as we can do. It's part of the reason for appeasement is what is the tensions, because they don't want the risk to take place. They need it to relax so they can try and get everything sorted out. And there's huge amounts of supplies moving around the world. What people don't forget is before the convoy system is implemented, before any of these things are done, there's huge amounts of supplies being moved around the world to try and allow for stockpiling. So anyway, the Americans will have ships I would describe in UAD as turret merchants. Yeah, if you assume a ship has a character, and it's the same character throughout history as the British do, then yes, some names seem to have a familiar fate smiling upon them. Although that might be because that might be good because the crews then want to live up to legacy. True. So, Clarke, question 1. What would you need to do to make ships with oversized barbettes so turrets could be upgraded from twin to triple in the future? You just need to build it fatter. Well, let me put it this way. You need to have a ship which is wide enough, and the barbette is wide enough, it could take a triple. So basically, 50% wider than your well, about 30 to 40% wider than the barbette will be normally for a twin. if you want to keep it to the same caliber. The Americans would have a Tillman-style battleship. George Newman, the USN would see 9 18-inch 50 cals and raise to 12 20-inch 50 cals. If they could. If the US Congress would fund it. That's the more interesting thing. You have to remember, the more expensive it becomes, the more difficult, the more expensive it becomes to fund, the more and more Tillman is not an outlier, because Tillman wasn't as much of an outlier as we like to believe. There were a lot of politicians who were going along those lines of thinking. I'm sorry, we probably see quad turrets on the US standard, so that's 16 guns. Good luck to the USN making them work. It will be fun to watch. Marguch, in a galaxy far, far away, Empire, we have a Death Star, terrible with fear. Aaron, we have Warspite and Rodney, checkmate. Yeah, we can make that one step worse. We can make that one step worse than Warspite. We have Warspite, Rodney, and Renown. And then you're just going, I would like to be anywhere else but here. I really would. The most annoying conspiracy is moon landings. It happened end of. Yeah, the sheer amount of effort which the Soviet Union put into trying to disprove the moon landings, if they couldn't and they were watching it the whole way and would have disproved it if they could have, tends to leave me to that one. Hello, Mark Harkness. You're 4K in today. You're on your backup one. Huh. Reference Dr. Clarke. Mr. Roosevelt started as sentient man as she walks through. He said 18-inch 50, and I know what that means, and it's disturbing. It happens by osmosis. Actually, no. Tell her that my friend Sarah, one of my best friends, right? We went through uni together, and she's basically another adopted sister, but she's very much of sort of pacifist in her approach to the world. And her and Sam are very good friends. And sort of Sam's the girl you sometimes, lady, you sometimes see, because she's the one who acts as my sort of videographer, etc. when I need someone extra for filming me. And it's when I walked in on them having a debate of King George V's versus what was it? Versus Yamato, and whether or not the King George V's, two of them could take Yamato, and that's when I realised my work was done. And also when Sam's husband basically was going, why? How are you having this debate? And they went, well, we saw this. There was this video on YouTube, this little short, and we don't think it's accurate. And you sort of go, but this is Alex's topic. And they're going, yes, but we've now been friends with him for nearly 20 years. We know it. We're having a debate about it because one of us thought it could do and one of us thought it couldn't. So, it happens. That's the next level. First there comes understanding, then there comes actually getting involved in the debates. Now, seriously, how did Admiral Fisher know when a ship was obsolete and had to be disposed of? He trusted his gut. And if he couldn't see a viable role for it in war, that was his reasoning. Sorry, did I thump too much? I don't know what it is. I did exactly the same thing last night on Discord, and you didn't barely notice it. And then I do it with XSplit, and you hear it dramatically. Reference, we should put something about ahistorical twaddle on a t-shirt. Mm-hmm. if you want, I will find some more. I have some. There we go. That's it. Right. I have some of the soundproofing I use on the roof to try and shape the sound. Shall I try and use that? Right. I will put that here. So I will hit that. How's that? That better, Jack Ray? When I hit that. That's because the audio on Discord is terrible. Represent, if we had 4 triple 14-inch or 12-inch, why not 16? Oh, it would be good. It would be interesting. Question 2. If you could tell the other delegation at the Washington Naval Treaty that the US was spying on their diplomatic communication, would you tell them? Well, you either cause it to all break down into a massive arms race, or you tell them in such a way that they manipulate it. I think if you tell them in such a way that they manipulate it, that might be better. But that would be your aim. But the trouble is, you're going to risk by telling them. You're going to risk it becoming an actual arms race and actually getting some heat into it. Daniel Cool. As the space history enthusiast, I have stacks of documents on top of stacks of documents that prove we did land on the moon, not once, not twice, but 6 times. Mark Harkness, on his alternate count. Tillman would die from apoplexy. Potentially. But he could also potentially get a whole group together of senators, and they could end up cutting the funding for the US Navy down to almost nothing. They could become a submarine destroyer and light cruiser only navy. Hey friend, my girlfriend coming now and sees her watching you on Sunday now. She started buying books about naval history now. Next step, taking her to Belfast. It's good. Life is good, my friend. Life is good. It's likely your desktop mic. I know. My plan... This week there's going to be a big announcement, and my plan is once that's over, when I come back, it's going to depend on the decision that's made. Because if we... Which I've already discussed with you all, as I mentioned to you all, if we decide... Because me and my sister now do all our teaching online, pretty much. So we've got to decide whether we're going to stay here or we're going to move. Because we have put a lot of money into this house to sort out the kitchen and everything and kitchen and bathrooms for my mum's arthritis, which is not going to get better. Because arthritis doesn't get better. You can get it to level off for a bit, but it's always eventually going to get a bit worse, and then you have to hopefully level it off again. Or we need to move. And if we're going to move, then there is a finite amount of resource I'm prepared to put into this particular office. Because as much as I love it, and I want to put in the railway there, etc., if we are going to move, it's better to save the money and then, rather than create the extra stuff I have to move, and then do it when I get into my next office. But if we're going to stay here, then I'm probably would see about getting a rooftop mounted boom mic. So have the boom mic coming down from the ceiling. And the trouble is the boom mic system I've got at the moment will trip to the desk, but it won't get over these screens. And I don't want it in front of them. So I've got to get sort of something to come from the ceiling, and I think that would stop the vibrations getting to the mic. Very good, Leslie Mitchell. Took your partner to the naval dockyard 2 years in a row. That's right. The British Empire starts rearmament with no national debt, all because the British Empire had Bismarck's weight in gold. Well, what infrastructure do you build? If I'm building infrastructure, I'll probably build some. It's going to sound strange. I probably, first of all, if I've got no national debt, I'm going to build up decent dry docks in certain places. So you wouldn't be surprised if Trimcommely, Singapore, etc., have more money spent on them. But also, I would probably build some stronger. Pardon me. Bless you. I wouldn't be surprised if I build some stronger defences in places like Gibraltar and Singapore. I think Singapore would not only have 15-inch guns, it would have 9.2-inch guns. I would have both in there. Actually, I might be really naughty. I might say the Vickers will put in the 14-inch guns in Singapore, and then they'll definitely be building a lot of them. I don't know. I would probably put them in turrets as well. I wouldn't want to have them in sort of the mounts they were in. I would put them in turrets, and I'd be putting them in batches of 3. So I put sort of at least 5 sets of three twin turrets, each with their own shell stores and each with their own defences around them. And I'd want at least the same for 9.2-inch guns, at least the same. And I would then have all those positions be ringed by air defense AA guns, and have radars built into them as well. That's the other thing. While I'm building chain home, I'd also be building chain Singapore and chain Ceylon and probably chain Gibraltar, maybe even chain Malta. And what ships get built, and what do you do to get the UK and all the Dominions ready for war? And do you make India a Dominion? I would love to. Making India a full Dominion is something about political growth, and again, you see, it was on the books. Britain was expecting India to be ready for Dominion status in about 1950. 1950 is when I was sort of looking at it, because, and the reason they was, this is one of the things terrible. Okay, the British acknowledged in their dominionization of certain nations, and as they were decolonizing to Dominion status, that the trouble when you're running a colony is you strengthen up various parts of it. You strengthen up the military, you strengthen up the security forces, and this creates an imbalance, which is countered by the presence of the colonizer. So they don't become dictatorial as with the balance of the colonizer, but the colonizer uses them to keep themselves in power. So it's the fault of the colonizer, but it also can only be remedied really by the colonizer, because you need to build up the other things in place. Now, there was a rapid growth of Indian political and self-determination, and there could have been potentially... Money doesn't really allow you to accelerate that, because that's something which takes time. So I'm not sure about Dominion status, but you could probably have done something. You do need to build some factories, and one of those things you need to build is an aircraft factory in probably Ceylon. You need to build an aircraft factory, an engine factory, etc., and all things you need to build them in sort of that area of the world. and some refineries. Why? Because you need somewhere building aircraft out in the sort of Indian Ocean. If you do it in Ceylon, you have easy access to pretty much everywhere, and it's quite defensible. And so, if you, especially, what you would probably want to make is make that building that factory or factory complex building naval types of aircraft. You might have it expanded to build long-range bombers as well. But basically, your naval fighter, your naval strike aircraft, all these things, and the engines that are suitable for them will be built there. And if you wanted to build a long-range bomber or long-range maritime patrol aircraft, that would have to use the engines being built for those systems. As for ships, well, honestly, if I have a free hand building ships, then I'm probably ordering pretty much exactly the same. I might be ordering them slightly quicker, and I might well be ordering upgrades of things a lot quicker. Let's put it this way: if I have no worry about monies, then I'm probably upgrading as many of the older battleships, older capital ships, and older cruisers to AA cruisers as I can, as quickly as I can. So that's the big difference. Dr. Clarke, Dr. Clarke, thinking about Graph Speed. Now I'm looking forward to a occasion where a pack of cruisers took on one battleship. There were actually occasions when packs of destroyers took on battleships, and packs of cruisers did take on interesting things. There's a few battles actually like that. One of the interesting things is that there's one of the battles like that is it's listed as a British loss, and it's a case of, yes, it is a loss because the British didn't achieve their strategic goal of getting the convoy through, but there's also the fact that a pack of cruisers managed to drive off a battleship, which is a battleship and several cruisers, which is not exactly bad going. So yeah. Genome, by the end of World War II, the US is putting auto-loading main armament on cruisers. Had any preliminary work be done for capital ships by the Navy? Both the US and UK were looking at, and Japan had looked at it. One of the interesting papers which I actually found in my dad's books, and which I think actually Drac currently has, because I think this is one he borrowed, actually has a paper about auto-loading from about 1920. And we sort of had a bit of a theory that maybe one of the reasons why the British were keen on the 14-inch was they thought they could make an autoloader 14-inch. Which they didn't think they could make for a 60 for anything bigger. Because if you'd had an auto-loading 14-inch, the rate of fire you'd been able to maintain, you would have dominated. Darwin, Doc, if you build a house to garden office railway so snacks and dog biscuits can be sent back and forth, depending where people are, you can send cups of tea to your mum in the garden. Honestly, actually have looked at that. Would need to use O gauge for that, which is the third line I want, because I've got HO, and I've got HOOO. I've got N gauge, which is the line which I'd planned for him here, and which I have my little portal railway in. And long-term plan, I always have looked at O gauge. But the thing is, if universities continue to keep, if I need to find how to put this, either work with a more reliable form of work with universities, or I need to find a way to make up roughly £2,000 a month of worth of income to be able to sustain that, because I can't afford to have universities on average 3 times a year they forget to pay you. I've been playing too much World War warships. Were full broadsides exceptional, the rule in World War 1 and 2? Full broadsides were the standard. And the reason you do that is you're maximizing your chance of hitting. Occasionally they do, once they get close enough that they can operate under local control, and that's once they're getting into close enough range they can operate under the local control, then they get fire at will, with the plot being maintained by the central director. But they tried to make it they tried to make it broadsides, or rather as many guns as possible firing. Hang on, no. John Bates, opinion on Harwood after the Battle of River Plate. Harwood is a very good officer who was trained for certain regions of the Royal Navy to operate in. He wasn't trained by either experience or inclination to deal with the internal politics that came from running such a post in the Mediterranean as he found himself running. You need to be, in the nicest way, you need to be prepared for people to try and blame you for everything. And he just wasn't expecting that. He was expecting everyone to be doing an open, honest discussion. And they were actually doing well, no, we have to preserve our post possession and things have gone wrong, so we're going to blame you. Look, I don't want to get too political, but when discussing British Empire, has anyone used the defence that they were better than Belgium and Portugal? Actually, as a rule, you find this out when nations are sometimes... Okay, so this is going to sound strange. There is no one who's a good coloniser power. Let me start off by saying that one, before anyone tries to misconstrue words, because I know some people are interesting. And secondly, there were actually, and we are fairly sure of this from historical readings, sometimes the local leadership would get together and would go, right then, we're going to get colonised whether we like it or not. Everyone else around us is getting colonised, we're going to. Who would we prefer? The British did as well as they did because most of the time they were preferred than over the other options. They were preferred. You would also build one or two railways that ran east-west or east-west from coast to coast with spur lines mid-India. I would build all sorts of infrastructure around the world. There would be all sorts of railways. Speaking of India, my dad and I were having a discussion about Indian infrastructure under the British Empire. We would definitely build a railway cross-country. And what you've just spoken of, Dusty. Yeah, there are railways which sort of run across... please don't get it wrong. There are railways which sort of run across country and which are damaged in the storms and various other things that have been going on in that period. But the trouble is they're not direct mainline routes, most of them. In fact, all of them. They are very interesting and very problematic, and that you need a proper line built. You also need people there who are going to quickly rebuild those railways. Dan, re-aircraft engines for worldwide use. The Bristol Pegasus Mercury cylinders would be fine and give large and small engines for fighters and bombers, and no reason not to be doubled to twin-row radials. Pretty much that's who I was leading to, probably Bristol over Rolls-Royce. And you can build those in more interesting parts of the world. If Bismarck was subject to an equal attack, equal in aircraft numbers to that which Yamato faced in Operation Tengo, how many 18-inch Mark 12 torpedoes might you take before succumbing? Let's put it this way. I'm not sure how many exactly would depend on us coming, because it can depend on exactly where they hit. But if you're hit with at least 4 torpedoes, you're going to have you're not going to be staying afloat. How speedily you go down is going to depend on where you're hit. But let's be honest, you can be taken out with 1 torpedo if it hits in the right spot. You can take 6 torpedoes and still be afloat, but sinking. But sinking. It depends on where those torpedoes hit. The Yanks build a lot of Merlin engines. And honestly, Merlin engines and Americans are both built to very tight tolerances. The main problem that was originally found between American conversion of the design drawings for the British designed Merlin is that when they found out that the British Imperial and the American Imperial were not quite the same in terms of the definition of, what was it? Various things were found to be not quite the same. There were differences between British Imperial and American Imperial units. So, could you get a 35,000 ton King George V with autoloaders? Potentially. I do try out for as many TV spots as I can get. I like TV work. It's fun. They're nice people. Take care, Amelia. Yeah, universities forget to pay contract lecturers quite regularly. It's one of the disturbing jokes. So far, this one has been fairly okay this academic year. They've been a bit short. They hadn't always paid me the correct amount, but they paid me. This month, they forgot to pay me. In 9601, if the Royal Air Force take delivery of what would have been 1,254 variations of Bolton Paul Defiance night fighters, then they A, have a colossal amount of aircraft to put up, and B, yeah, that's going to cause trouble. That many night fighters, guided by radar and supported as they could be, is going to cause trouble for air raids. It just is. Romney having Dymchurch line is really cool. That's what I was trying to make the point of, Rob Razor. Well, the trouble is, I have noticed that with YouTube, okay, it's not the YouTube viewers who are the problem. It's the people who occasionally jump into YouTube because they see something turns up in the logarithm and they occasionally run in and they just go, "Ah, you said this!" And you're going, "No, I didn't say that. I was responding to a question, and I was answering it as common-sensely as I could. But still, when answering these questions, I therefore have learnt from experience that I have to start prefacing things with, "Right then, I'm not saying any of the colonizers are good or it's good to become a colony. However, da 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 da." Vanguard, to be honest, with railways in Britain, I thought they should widen the loading gauge. That's why the reason is bigger war shipments and faster speed, more powerful locomotives. It would be interesting, but remember, you could actually go back. If Isambard Kingdom Brunel won, won the race rather than Stevenson in terms of railway construction, Britain would use broad gauge. If Brunel won, Britain would be on broad gauge, and if Britain had been on broad gauge, the odds are quite a lot of the world would be on broad gauge because Britain, as the colonial power, set the tone. So broad gauge would have magically become the world's standard gauge. And then go through all the historical differences from that point. It's amazing once you start off, because, again, think about it, because a lot of British railway builders went and helped build the railways in America. So those could again be built to broad gauge rather than standard gauge. So American railways, Canadian railways will be built to broad gauge. Indian railways will be built to broad gauge. Australian railways built to broad gauge. African railways built to broad gauge. The world would change. It's amazing what happens once you do look at these histories and you start thinking it through. And it was cool. Oh great, you just gave Wargaming the next premiership and autoloading King George V with what I would assume to be 8 or 10 second reload. One of the designs I found had 4, and this is one of the designs we found at one point that was looked at, and could have been a model for the auto-loading, would have been 4 quadruple 14-inch guns with auto-loading capacity. Because basically it was, when you got it down to auto-loading, etc., it's just a shell fire. It's just a machine gun battleship. That's basically what it was. If you can imagine what 16, 14-inch guns can do. Yes, Brunel's railway designs were interesting. Quite a few of the single-track tunnels and bridges were used went into the 21st century as twin tracks, which was, well, sometimes with minimal changes. That's why George Newman, as you do admit, the biggest trouble is converting it, is all the infrastructure required to convert it. That's why it's better if it's Brunel wins if you go back further. Clarke, who would have benefited from most from warships that were good enough but not amazing, and what would they look like? Well, let's put it this way: if you go through World War II and you look at the nations which did good enough but not amazing, you'd have had the Italians focusing on their heavy cruisers and probably produce more of them, rather than producing Deletorios, perhaps. But they might still have done that. They might still have done. The ships were mostly a mixture of good enough but not amazing. The Japanese wouldn't have built the Yamato Musashi. They would have been building probably, honestly, something closer to a replacement for the Convoys. A replacement for them, something similar to that, some sort of battlecruiser style ship. Maybe with 9 guns in 3 triple turrets still, but, possibly not 18-inch guns. Probably, maybe even they've gone down to 14-inch guns. And just churn them out. The Americans and British both did build quite a lot of good enough, not spectacular. That there is, the entire American destroyer profile. We sing their praise of their destroyers, but they are not the best destroyer they could build on a technical scale. They are the destroyer they can build best in vast quantities. And that's the point. If they were building the very best technically cutting-edge destroyer they could build, it would have been far less numbers than they needed. And it's saying the British, when you're looking at things like the Hunt-class escort destroyers or the Flower-class sloops. So, yeah. Everyone to an extent does benefit from building good enough but not amazing ships. The big ones who would change most would be the Germans, because they'd actually get some more numbers. Actually, if Bismarck was sunk by swordfish, can you imagine the absolute fit Hitler would have? It might get the Graf Zeppelin built. Which would lead to an interesting carrier battle somewhere in the North Atlantic. I think the magazines on the auto-loading ships were designed to deal with it, but there's also the fact that the rate of fire is going to significantly shorten an engagement. Because if you're upping your rate of fire from, let's say, 2 rounds a minute to 3 rounds a minute thanks to auto-loading, or maybe even 4 rounds a minute for the initial burst, if you do a 4 round a minute in the first burst and then settle down to 3 rounds a minute, right? Then you're from 16 guns, you'll have 64 shells in the air. Considering it's an average 4-minute flight time for engagement, you can then have a further 144 in the air, so that's going to be, by the time the first shells are splashing down in your where you are, you're going to have 208 shells on their way. And another 16 being loaded. Now, if you got 208 shells on their way, capital ship shells within 5 minutes. Well, within 4 minutes, there isn't going to be much of you left. So yeah, I do need to carry, at that point, every one of the guns has fired, 12 plus 16 shells. So if I'm carrying... let's say, 32 shell... no. I probably want to be carrying roughly 320 shells per gun. So 16 shells is 5 minutes roughly time. That's going to be 20 times 5, so that's going to be at 100 minutes of combat. If I want to, I can make that down to an hour, probably. Cut it down a bit. But, it works. Jacob. Could I do a video on British theoretical autoloader? If I could find more information, I would. Clarke, Alex, I previously brought up that in UAD there is a preference for smaller ships than a ship like Yamato. So what are the real-world advantages to bigger ships in UAD is not simulating? You see, the real world pressures are the limitations. Because in UAD you can operate theoretically an infinite number of ships. You can support them, you can crew them. In the real world, your crew is finite. And your experienced crew is especially finite. So if you want to get the best, use the best possible personnel to crew your ships, you're going to have a finite number of ships you can actually crew and maintain. And the thing is, that number of really critical personnel, it's the same on a ship the size of Yamato, and as the same on a ship the size of, I don't know, the Deutschland class cruisers. So it's pretty much the same number of critical key cornerstone personnel. So if you can only supply one of those ships with those personnel, and that's your real limitation, that in your infrastructure to build ships, what do you do? Which is going to work? Because in a one-on, if let's say you have a fight and you've got 6 Yamatos versus 6 Deutschlands, who's going to win? It's going to be Yamatos. But let's be honest, if you've got a fight of 2 Yamatos versus 6 Deutschlands, probably the Yamatos are going to win. Because let's be honest, 18-inch guns, they're going to slam them home. And besides, they've got, what? 18-inch guns between them. And the 6 Deutschlands have, what, 36 11-inch guns? The range, the sheer engagement range is going to be a factor. But also there's the size and the weight of the impact. And also there's the fact that the larger ship you've got, the larger the guns you can carry. And the more stable it's going to be when it's firing them, which is going to make it more accurate when firing. So all these are going to be a factor. Greater rate of fire equals bigger chance to get the most important first hit. Yes, and in the nicest way with that many shells in the air, probably the first, second, and third hit. Stuka had a very robust landing gear, I would agree, but not the version which they're planning on fitting on the carrier. For some reason, they'd actually managed to make it worse for the Graf Zeppelin. I was wondering, what were they using Bristol Bowfighter for? I think it was long-range photo reconnaissance, but I'm not 100% sure. Question: did you know you would go to all the way to your PhD when you started in uni? Honestly, no. The plan was to do my bachelor's and join the Navy. That was my plan. And then I would do my PhD later in life. But my mum and sister got ill. And there are other ways of helping out. So I went through and did my master's and my PhD. And took care of them. I haven't regretted the choice. I'd have enjoyed my time in the Navy. But the plan was always to get the PhD at some point. The trouble is, Peter Dawson, whilst you can sort of the resources theoretically to build 140,000 tons of ships, then you can build 2 larger ships for 70,000 tons like Yamato, or you can build 4 ships like 35,000 tons for King George V. That's not exactly the same, though, is it? Because, let's be honest, that's not pure tonnage. Can you build as many propellers blades as you can build for the 30? Because for the King George V's, that's going to be 16 propellers. For the Yamatos, that's going to be 8. So how much brass you got? What's your brass manufacturing capability? How about engines, turbines? Again, all these things are going to have impact. 8 versus 16. Armour is cheap. Steel is cheap. You can produce those. But ships are not made up of armour and steel. And the thing is, once you get into it, and actually building the full 35,000 ton ships is more complicated than building the 270,000 tons, because all those complicated bits, which can be bottlenecks, there are less of them. Because, again, for your 4 35,000-ton ships, you've got to build 12 turrets. For your 2 70,000-ton ships, you've got to build 6. Everything adds up. A 3-hour video about Draken for him to do a 5-minute guide about you. That would be interesting, Brian419. That would be interesting. But honestly, we're more likely to do a video together, chatting through things. I was asking, an 18-inch shell would break a Deutschland in half. John Sykes, 2 issues to the large caliber also. If your initial aim is off, you just chucked a lot of expensive metal to kill fish. And 2, cooling barrels will become a problem. True, and that's exactly what they ran into. I found that in the UAD the best ship for the campaign is a 20,000-ton heavy cruiser with 12 11-inch guns at 32 knots with 4 secondaries. That sounds about right for the UAD. The changes going into the second edition will be corrections for the second edition. You see, the thing is, if it was happening, I have managed the trip to Haida. I might add some of the photos I took aboard Haida into it, and some of the stuff from Haida. Add a little note about Haida into it, from visiting Haida. I might add in that section as well. I have considered putting it together. Surely you got to be close to the advantage of an autoloader's ship to work, firing at 20. Plus, you have to miss. No. You have to remember that they've got a lot of confidence in long-range fire by the end of World War One, and they're getting very confident in it throughout the interwar years. They're practicing in it a lot, and yes, they're not always right, but they're they're quite happy with it. And again, the advantage is if you've got the autoloader. Think of it from this perspective. And especially this is pre-radar. In the visual world, if you spot the enemy before they spot you, and you get to engagement range, and you've got your guns in their action, you can have all those shells in the air before they can actually respond. So that's the other advantage with the autoloader. You could literally do a almost hit-and-run style attack. I haven't played War at Sea yet, but it's on my list of things. I don't think Chobham, which is a land armour, is deployed on it. But you've asked me the question of Chobham-like armour. And armouring in modern warships is interesting because theoretically you have to say, oh, well, no, they don't carry armour like they used to. Well, they don't carry armour like they used to. But there are sections of a ship which I wouldn't be surprised had some form of protection on them. The Firebrand wasn't bad. It was just not as good as it could have been. It's not a bad aircraft, though, really, in some respects. I'm waiting for the great debate on Agincourt, Pre-Dreads, Majestics or Sovereigns, and many classes of battlecruisers and so on. Oh, that'll be a long debate. Yes, the deleted ships are getting reinstituted. What's on? Could we get a correction sheet of stickers if we get the first edition? If we got the first edition, I'm not sure. Yes, he did get a lot of pictures of you, Stafford, in that video. In his video, trust me, he was. If you notice, actually, at certain points, he's using you to stitch the images together. He's using you as the central point when he stitches the pictures together. If you just watch the video line, you'll see he's using your presence to stitch the picture together. Thought you'd enjoy that one. Well, let's see. This is all going to be announced this week. Where we're going, and what we're going to do. But let's put it this way: we start off. If we were planning a trip to Oz, which of course we haven't announced yet, but could be. It's amazing how soon it could be out, if we are. But it's all going to depend on you, because especially now. Especially, I know I keep saying this, but please note, please excuse me. It's fresh. It's hurting. It was $2,000. Hopefully tomorrow they will actually change it. They will actually just put it through, rather than saying insisting on the waiting till the end of April thing. But we'll see. But no, it'll be a fun trip. Let's say if we did Australia, and we'll be starting in one side of Australia, moving to the other side. That's going to affect the order of ships we'll be seeing. It's something which is definitely bilge pumps. Just Funk on the Monarch. It's definitely bilge pumps discussion, which should be out tomorrow. By the way, I decided not to do it coming out today because, frankly, I thought Sunday's busy enough, and honestly, I still didn't feel that great yesterday. So I did, I saved my strength for the lives instead. The live version of Bilge Pumps will be fun. Steve Clarke, question 4. By World War II, could a ship with 14-inch autoloader guns do the time on target trick, such that it could fire 2 salvos which arrive at the same time? It would depend on... Depend on how high you could angle your guns and the distance involved. Okay? Probably could if the distance was right and if you can angle your guns right. So you can send one on the longer trip and one on the shorter trip. But you might not want to, as that would make it more difficult to work out which was the accurate shot and which wasn't. Although once you have radar-guided gunnery fire control, that does make life even more interesting when you consider a sort of 14-inch autoloader. Pardon me, sorry. Please note, today, rather than eat the aforementioned cooking, I had a takeaway. It cost money, but I decided it was better than eating my sister's last meal before she goes off. She's away this week, so I'm doing all the cooking. Yay! Hallelujah! I love her dearly, but she does have some very interesting ideas about cooking. It depends on the firing computer can calculate, can I? Well, yeah, to an extent, and the titles are pretty precise, but they're told to an extent they're fed. The machines are fed. The fire control tables are fed information by various sources, and they can be as accurate as the information they receive. So if there's garbage going in, there'll be garbage coming out. If they're getting accurate information, they'll have accurate information going out. The small orange cat walked across the keyboard and you're now upside down. Hello! I am in the land down under, I suppose, now. Marcus, I confess for many years I misspelled Warspite as Warsprite. I hadn't heard of the bird and thought it was some angry fey deity. Honestly, that would make sense. Clarke, have you done menu plans? No, but I have got the meat I need in the fridge and in the freezer, and I will cook. I was planning on. Let's put it this way: it will all depend on what I cook this week. Will depend on what I get, whether I get paid or not. If I get the pay sorted out, then I will go with a plan of getting some things like potato gnocchi and those sort of things and cooking that for my mum, because I'll be doing the food for both of us. Because at the moment, while she's getting over the things she's getting over, I think of the two of us, I'm the one who should be standing around cooking in the kitchen. So I'll be cooking for both of us, and I'll probably go for... Well, you see, with potato gnocchi, I can do this really nice... It sounds slightly strange, but it's not. Sort of what I called smothered gnocchi, which has cheese, crispy bacon, barbecue sort of sauce, a cheesy barbecue sauce with sort of crispy bacon in, usually some veg depending on what I can find in the fridge, and all over sort of the gnocchi, and it's a really nice meal. It sounds terrible. It probably causes several of my Italian friends to be very, very upset with me, but it's actually very nice. I might well use the jar, but first of all, I will use it on myself before I use it on my mum to check it's okay for her. Because her list of allergies is disturbingly long. She has a ring binder. If anyone ever tells you asthma is just asthma cannot get any stranger, so I mentioned allergy-induced asthma. It's fun. Thank you, Stafford. And let's put it this way. If we were considering, if we just come down on the side of moving rather than putting the money into the house, there's going to be a long discussion about where we're going to move to. It'll probably be the UK, but we do have family in Canada, we do have family in Australia, and it's going to be a sort of a real discussion of what suits our family. So in a tech race, how do more efficient engines give an advantage? As an example, in the 50s could have been one. I think the UK V7 would get the Convoy 5859, which had less fuel burn at 0.73. Efficient engines can give you range and can give you better endurance, but they can also give you the same amount of range on less weight. which can theoretically mean you can use that space within the airframe to carry more cargo or people, so make more profit on that way. Or you can build a smaller airframe, or you can go faster. There's all sorts of options which efficiency will buy you. Yeah, it's the fact that it did fire its cannons entirely by itself makes me most worried about it being an SSBN. I'm sorry, I know it's a very lauded name, and giving it a ballistic missile submarine I can completely understand from a status perspective. But also, it's HMS Warspite. Why? Why would you do that? Why? Your mum did something right. I don't know many PhD holders who would stay home and take care of their mum. Your mum too. I know a few, but yeah, we're actually quite happy to both be working from home. And that's one of the other things. That I like uni lecturing. I like doing the online lecturing at the moment. I have started to really like it because I can do it for other unis, which means I actually get more work than I used to in some regards. And that's a case of if I could get... Well, what I've been looking at for recently was seeing if there was any online teaching posts for history, etc., in any topic around the country. If they're online, I can teach from anywhere in the country. And mainly using that to replace my primary hours. So I keep the teaching... Because I want to keep my foot in the door for academia. I like the idea of being able to teach in universities, and I like being an academic, and I like the access it gives you. This is going to sound egotistical, but when it comes to research, it's far easier to talk your way into places if you're an academic than if you're an independent historian. It's very useful to have the .ac.uk at the end of your email address, and I've known that when I'm organising things in Canada, etc., if I email them from my Gmail account and my normal account, there's virtually no response. Email them from one of my work accounts. Oh, hello, Dr. Clarke. Okay, fine, let's use it. And there's nothing against them, it's just that immediately makes you stand out. And so it's useful. So I want to keep that going. But I would prefer to find another source of employment for it, preferably to fill out roughly the same amount of hours, which is a 0.6 posting. We'll see. How much potassium do you get in a day? I just had hyperglycemia, or extreme low blood potassium, and leukemia, and I came out to find that that's population deficit. The right amount is life changing. Most of my potassium probably comes from bananas, and I usually have a banana at least every other day, because that's one of the few fruits I have. So I probably have enough potassium, because I have other things as well which provide potassium, but bananas are probably the big thing for me, and I have usually 3 to 4 days a week. If you my Fridays go somewhere warm, that's why we're considering the south of the UK, down sort of the coast region, southwest. And she does have potassium. Cool. I wouldn't recommend Southern California, however, it's surprisingly British. yeah. I would be also worried about a new Warspite running into things, given the last one around the Neko class. Oopsie. That's the only thing you can say. Mm-hmm. It's like there's a few things which I'm sort of slowly working on, and it's one of the annoying things that this has happened right now, because honestly, if it was the same issue with the employer in probably about 5-6 months time, it would be a case of it would be annoying, but it wouldn't be as, oh frick, I can't do that as it is. Could you do a video about all the odd things connected to More Spite? Well, I will have you know that I have a little plan which is set up to cover June, because, of course, one needs a plan for June. Because of, as I've said, I'm only scheduling one live. And you'll be glad to know that the key ships listed for June, that's Key Ships Series 2, includes HMS Cossack, HMS Warspite, USS Texas, USS Enterprise, HMS Nubian, USS Monitor, HMS Illustrious, and yeah, that's it for June for the key ships. Well, hell no, and HMS Renown. I have to admit, key ships is basically my phrase for. I wanted a series to talk about ships this year, and I couldn't figure one in technology, so I'm just going to call them the Key Ship series, and I'm just going to talk about them because I feel like it. Because last year was the year of the cruiser, and that was easy to get ships in. I just went for a cruiser class, or a vaguely cruiser connection. That's fun. I'm going for the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise. I just thought it was fun. They're going to be about specific ships. And there's going to be another Key Ship series. Well, basically, the first Key Ship series is going to be the end of this week. Well, end of next week. It's going to start because I'm away for about a week being course director for Justin Craig, which is always fun. If you've not heard me talk about them before, they're the revision company I go and work for. And they are good. They always do pay on time. And so I like going to work for them. Steve Clarke, question 6. So which non-RN vessels have equally weird machine spirits in charge of fire control, engines, or steering? Don't mess with Texas. Any ship the US has ever had called Texas has not been a fun ship for anyone to argue with. Leaving that to one side. The French don't really have a ship which has a similar ego. They really don't. Guillaume Chegeret seems to do pretty well as always being seen to put in places where she's not going to get hit. She also seems to manage to always be in the right place to fire at the right time. Trying to think of a Spanish ship. Not really. They don't really. The Spanish don't have any luck in the Spanish-American War. They just don't have any luck. They really don't. It's quite sad, really, for them. They don't have luck, and the fact that they haven't supported their navy for years beforehand makes it worse. Yeah, that's an interesting question. That is an interesting question. It does seem to be something almost perversely far more common in the Royal Navy than other navies. But that could be because the Royal Navy fights in a lot more, has fought in a lot more wars than most other navies. In that the Royal Navy, and it seems to be often the same name ships, because usually, because those names have been prominent, they get put onto prominent ships when those ships go. They're then applied to more prominent ships, which are then just as likely deployed to war fighting because they are the capable ships. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling, self-perpetuating prophecy that those names become like that. Which is again one of the reasons why I'm really worried about the name chosen for ballistic missile subs. Good lord. No! Just no! I know why you've done it, but no! Seriously! It's like Dreadnought. Again, Dreadnought is not a good name to name something that you want to be quietly going around. Dreadnoughts have been notoriously ships which have got stuck in with the opponent, given any chance. In fact, the only reason HMS Dreadnought is kept specifically so she won't get damaged and she won't be too much at risk is to get with the Channel Squadron to protect the Channel Squadron. She still manages to find the time to reverse over an enemy submarine. She rams it and then she reverses over it to make sure it's so. You sit there and go, seriously? What circumstance? That's if you've got that kind of pedigree, that kind of history. And you look at the names they're chosen, and it's Dreadnought, Valiant, Warspite. Well, let's consider the Valiants in Royal Navy history. We've had a Repulse class third rate, which was launched in 1807. We had a 1759 HMS Valiant, which was launched from Chatham in 1759 and served under Augustus Keppel in the 7 Years' War. Was with him at the capture of Havana in 1763. She took part in the Battle of the Saints and fought at the glorious 1st of June. And captured a French corvette. She served for 40 years, 1759 to 1799. HMS Valiants are not ships which which are kept out of action. She was a Hector-class ironclad battleship. She was a Queen Elizabeth-class battleship. She's been a attack submarine and was the second of Britain's nuclear-powered submarines. And she's now going to be a Dreadnought class submarine. Her battle honours are Belle Isle, Havana, Ushant, the Saints, 1st of June, that's the glorious first, of course, Basque Roads, Jutland, Norway, Mediterranean, Matapan, Crete, Malta Convoys, Sicily, Salerno, Sabang, and the Falkland Islands. Yes, that's a very decorated ship, but that's also a ship which has a habit of going and fighting everything. You know, we've got Warspite, we've got Dreadnought, and we've got King George VI. Now, King George VI is fine. That's a new name. But, you know, Warspite, Battle Honours, Cadiz, Orfordness. Cadiz is 1596, Orphaness 1666, Solbay 1672, Schonveld 1673, Texel 1673, Barfleur 1692, Velez Malaga 1705, Marbella 1705, Lagos 1759, Quiberon Bay 1759, Jutland 1916, Atlantic 1939, Narvik 1940, Norway 1940, Calabria 1940, Mediterranean 1940-43, Malta Convoys 1941, Malta and Matapan 1941, Crete 1941, Sicily 1943, Salerno 1943, English Channel 1944, Normandy 1944, Biscay 1944, Walcheren 1944. And Dreadnought. Not any better. Okay? Dreadnought. The Armada, 1588. Cadiz, 1596. Lowestoft, 1665. 4 Days Battle, 1666. Orphaness, 1666. Solbay, 1672. Schonveld, 1673. Texel, 1673. Barfleur, 1692. Passero, 1718. Cape Francis, 1757. Trafalgar, 1805. Georgian, the US of Robert Z.S. Johnson seemed to have interesting hour or two. The US of William de Porter was cursed. Yes, the US destroyers seem to have some interesting machine spirits as a group, though. HMS New Zealand, and the question was which non-RN vessels, and technically New Zealand is another HMS, and it's another HMS. HMS Australia's interesting. Similar, 9681, similar. Richards, is there actually a ramming speed, and if so, what is it? It's the best, but it's as fast as you can go. You want to hit with as much energy as you possibly can. So, no, it seems the new naming scheme for British ballistic missile hubs is a sign of a new strategic outlook on ballistic missile hubs. It's also a sign that perhaps they're going to start taking over the world. Just don't put AI in them. Yeah, the King Georges have always been interesting vessels. Because it would be quite nice to have the away dive bomber. It would be. Right then, I'm going to start on the books. But first of all, and this is a product to the sheer amount of liquid I've been having to drink lately. I'll be back in a second. I am going to leave you with a very cool picture while I'm wandering around, because I have some very cool pictures. I'll be back in a second.
slideshow. Activate the slideshow. Put it onto a 30-second rotation. Add, start, add. Desktop. Dun, 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 dun. There you go. Should be some cool photos.
Hey, by gum. Oh. Remind me not to get ill again. It's terrible.
Ugh. Oh, either I've not been gone long, or I've literally just been gone for exactly a minute. Ba-da-dum. So either I've been gone less than 30 seconds, or I've been gone exactly a minute, over a minute. Probably that. So, books. I have a pile of books here. Oh, there they are. So let's start off with Italian Heavy Cruisers from Trento to Bolzano. Now, honestly, I have a feeling this is a new edition. But it's a good one. It's always a good book to read. It's got beautiful drawings inside. And it has got, well, all this stuff. It is really well put together. And really worth a read if you're interested in Italian heavy cruisers. And I could have really done with it last year. It is a really, really good book. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the editing section and make sure I add in the timestamp. And, well, that's basically, it's almost 110, so what we'll do is we'll do 22. So, Trento to Bolzano. Enjoy it. Good luck with Loki, Wayne. Not wrong one. You're wondering what these pictures are. Well, one is one of the last pictures. And one is a US idea for, well, this is when I usually start to cause various American viewers to have a panic attack. Because yes, this is another idea for a sea control ship. This is a strike cruiser Mark II. It was going to have space for Vistol aircraft. It was going to have, of course, a runway, but it was going to have Aegis. It was going to be nuclear powered. It was going to have all sorts. You can see there that it's going to have six quad harpoon launchers. It would have been a truly powerful presence on the world's oceans, and it would have been quite fun as well. Let's be honest, it would have been fun to watch going around. But it's rather appropriate to have, because we have this book here. This is the topic now. The Italian heavy cruisers. From Trento to Bolzano. No, that was, as I said, that was a nuclear-powered cruiser. Shows you some of the complexity of building turrets. That's one of the 203mm 50 cal turrets of the Trieste being assembled in the Ansaldo factory, without its armour plates fitted on it yet, at that point. Ah, we're talking about the Zara class, are we? Right, so let's talk about the Zara class. Please note they did have a thwart-ship torpedo launchers. Always fun to have. Always nice to have such torpedo launching systems. Now, in terms of calibers and numbers of embarked weapons, the main and secondary armament of the Zara followed that of the earlier Trentos, with 4 twin 203mm turrets and 8 twin 100mm 47 caliber mounts. But unlike the Trentos, they were not equipped with torpedo tubes. The Trentos had been armed with the first 203mm guns produced in Italy, i.e. the 50 caliber Model A 1924 made by Ansaldo and manufactured using the Schneider process. These were constructed with a single tube, full-length jacket, and a breech ring. And had a loose liner, which could be changed on board. A single cradle in a twin turret with a single elevator for the ammunition and restricted to loading at a specific predetermined angle. The most important defects were the low rate of fire and a considerable dispersion of the salvos. The 203mm guns of the Zaras, the Ansaldo 1929 model with a length of 53 calibers, represented a considerable improvement, including, while retaining the twin-barreled single cradle arrangement, separate ammunition elevators for each gun, and a possibility of loading at all angles. In addition, lowering the muzzle velocity from 930mm a second to 900 meters a second, resulting in less dispersion of the rounds. Just a drop of 30 meters a second led to less dispersion. There you go. It's a good book. It is a really cool book, and yeah, I recommend that one. I actually honestly thought I had it, and I spent ages looking and thinking it was a duplicate copy, but I can't find it, so I presume
either I had it and I've given it to someone and it's loaned out, which usually I note down in my Excel spreadsheet, or I thought I had it and I didn't, or I had another book which was very similar to it, and that's what I'm confusing it with. Jacob, regarding nuclear power, the other day there was a news message that said that the USN will never share nuclear power tech with anyone else after giving it to Australians. To very extent, I read an article about the possibility of new nuclear merchant ships, and if those become mainstream, many more navies will be able to get nuclear, I think. Yes, and there's also the fact that the... let's put it this way, it's highly... There's so many workarounds being factored into the whole Australia deal, it's kind of an interesting one. Actually, didn't we do a video on the Italian cruisers and had a laugh about how you could fire a .50 cal 50 cal into the armor, deck armor, lots of them, and possibly go through? Or an Oracle, definitely. I think we have had a discussion. I don't think I've laughed about it, but I think there's a discussion about the sheer weakness of some of their armor plating. Nice thing to say, true. I'm not sure if this is your area, but a major power British Commonwealth scenario. Is it really checkmate for the USA if Rolls-Royce buys the Allison Company in 1995? Because apparently, if it is if pre-95. It certainly creates a powerful capability. I'm not sure if it's checkmate, but it's a powerful capability. Some battleships are like that. Some are. Now, next book. Oh, I was right. I got the right one without even looking. Oh. By gum. Sorry if I'm not as active or as ebullient as I normally am this evening. Still getting over this week. Right. Far Distant Ships from by Joseph Schull. Now, this book is definitely of the new to me category. It was first published in 1950. This edition published in 1987 by the Naval Institute Press. Now, it is the official account of Canadian naval operations in World War II. Far Distant Ships. I've been trying to get a hold of a decent copy of this for years, so I was very happy when I finally got one. It is very hard to get a copy of, I think, outside Canada, and even in Canada, the people I've talked to, some of them were surprised it didn't even know it existed. It is a very interesting and very fulsome account. Okay? Which is well done. On the Italian cruisers, it might have been the chat laughing and Dr. despairing over it. Whilst going, you finally got heavy cruisers right in the Zaras, and then the Warspite comes along. Life happens. Especially when Warspite's involved. The trouble is, Stafford, to do what the Italians wanted to do with their cruisers, if you wanted to make them with better AA and better armour, you would have had to make them bigger and more bigger. And they would have certainly been a lot heavier. And it would have been very, very obvious. It was obvious enough that they were breaking the treaty limits. It would have been so obvious that people couldn't have pretended ignorance. It would literally have been it would have been obvious enough that journalists would have noticed. And I'm not talking about defence specialist journalists. I'm talking about regular journalists who don't usually cover defence, who are usually political or foreign affairs and don't care much about equipment. Going, that ship's massive. It's supposed to be roughly the same weight as a county, and that thing is massive. In answer to your question, Steve Clarke, along with the Tizard mission, there's also the there's the Sempil mission to Japan. There are various missions to Australia, etc., and all those sort of areas, and Canada. There's a whole detailed stuff which goes to Canada. And mainly the Tizard mission seems to take stuff from the mission which already existing in Canada. Right, so, what would I say about this book? Well, it's got some maps in it. Not an overabundance, but it's got some. It's old style, if this is going to make sense in terms of its photo approach. So that's one of its photos. Perfectly fine, but it's the old style. The Canadian ships and sailors on loan with the Royal Navy represented a considerable and rather courageous investment of present resources in the hope of future gain. Few as they were, they could ill be spared while the U-boats ravaged the convoys and Alice fought like a strong man with a cancer gnawing at his middle. Yet from the beginning, all men of good heart, all intelligent planners had to base their efforts on the assumption that the Atlantic battle would finally be won, and in its broadest aspects that the battle was not defensive. It was a sustained effort to advance the war potential of North America 3,000 miles eastward to the beachhead of the British Isles. Victory in the Atlantic, all essential though it might be, was nevertheless only a preliminary. The last and greatest battle would still lie ahead, to be fought on other seas, in narrow waters, on roaring smoke-shrouded beaches, and in the heartlands of the enemy. Short of stalemate and defeat, there was no other prospect before the United Nations, and the final effort would require every ounce of strength which they could summon. Canada must contribute. A nucleus of Canadian naval strength must be built and trained and ready for the culminating assault. So it was that many of the Canadians, who had gone to England for their training in the first months of war, remained with the Royal Navy. For the same reason, many others had followed them, to serve in British ships of all types, from aircraft carriers to motor launchers. Canadian naval pilots from early in 1940 distinguished themselves with a fleet air arm. There are a few Canadians in battleships, cruisers and British ships of every other type, including submarines, in such branches as radar, comparatively new and developing as the war progressed,
our men seemed peculiarly apt, and Canadians at one time or another served as radar officers in most of the larger British ships. Now, there is a reason why they seem peculiarly apt, and this is the thing. This is the scenario. When you're looking at it as a percentage of your force, they seem to have more of an apt than the British ones, who are providing a far larger number of people. Okay? But the thing is, you're sending out your very best, most qualified, most capable people, and so they are going to be the most suitable already to those things. So they're it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're sending out your best, and therefore they tend to be best for the most technical and problematic things. So a higher percentage of them will go into those fields than the British, which are providing the vast majority of forces. But in numerical terms, the British are, of course, providing more personnel doing it. But it does mean that people like to write these things like, the Canadians were peculiarly apt for this thing. They're not. But there again, neither are the British peculiarly apt for certain things, which often they get associated with, and the Americans. You're not. It's usually circumstance and context which makes these things happen. To a very slight and limited extent, their work was compensation for the mighty resources of men, ship knowledge and equipment which the British put behind the main Canadian effort in the Atlantic. Far more important, however, and principally motivating Canadian contributions to the Royal Navy was the fact that the experience of these men, on loan, was accumulating into a fund upon which Canada could draw in the later years of war. The policy, like many plans and policies in war, was never fully implemented. When the climactic days came and new units and forms of Canadian naval strength began to be assembled, it was found that many officers and men were so widely dispersed or so integrally associated with the Royal Navy ships they could not be withdrawn. Yet in other cases, experienced men or groups of men did return from the Royal to Canadian Navy, and their hard-won training became disseminated through its ships, or became the basis upon which other complements and units and other flotillas were built. It's a good book. Knight 6831. Really? HMS Unicorn was a forward aviation support ship. Calling it anything else is just wrong. No one would believe it. Terrible. Bell makes some very interesting points about Churchill and sea power. I think I'd say he brings a lot of context to the discussion. Of course, I would say I don't agree with all of the arguments and conclusions he reaches, but it was a very thought-provoking and very intriguing read, and I felt better for having read it. So that's my view on Churchill and Sea Power by Mr. Bell. If the Almirante Latour class super dreadnought battleship had gotten the 6 twin 4-inch guns and the 5 twin 40mm before both World War II, how much use would they have been? Well, they'd certainly have a more capable AA fit, but does that really affect their usage? Yes or no, depends where they're used. Are they running up against aircraft on a regular basis? If they are, then that's more useful to have a more capable AA fit. If not, then it doesn't really help much, does it?
she was finished to the same level she was going to be finished as. She was used as a CVL because that's what she was needed and more useful for at that time. But she wasn't built to be a CVL, but she was the model for the CVLs. The Unicorn is the model for the light fleet carriers, and that's just beyond doubt. Another book on the same subject. That's an interesting one. Another book on the same subject that would give you Churchill in World War II. Cunningham's autobiography. That's always a good starting point for World War II. And the wider strategy and Churchill's involvement and lots of people's involvement in it, really, because that's Cunningham. And How the War Was Won by Phillips, Payson and Bryan is pretty good for a strategic overview. And Marcus Faulkner's War at Sea and Naval's Atlas of World War II. It has a foreword by Andrew Lambert in it. It's pretty good. It's very, very good, actually. I pretty much make it required reading for my students. A good book on the light fleet carriers. Honestly, Angus Constant's book on light fleet carriers is probably on the British aircraft carriers 1939 to 45 is probably the best one. Start off with that. It really isn't a specific book on light fleet carriers. That helps.
Right. So, this is an interesting one to me, because I honestly thought I'd read it. I honestly thought I had it. And again, it could be another one I've given off to a student. It could be one I've given off to a student, and that could be why I couldn't find out a solid copy. But Bernard Holmes, Hallmark. Ah, thank you. I have the atlas on the shelf, and the Sailor's Odyssey in the box on it. Time to dig it up. They're always good. The Allied Convoy System is a good book. It is a good one. There's a few good books on the Battle Atlantic currently out. Basically, the big important person for the Age of Sail Navy is Lord Sandwich. That's the big important person for the Age of Sail Navy. And yeah, the first Lords of the Admiralty, rather than Sea Lords, often do have a lot of influence over strategy, etc. Actually, what did the British do if they woke up one day and found the land of that we know as the Republic of Ireland was empty, with only infrastructure still standing, but the entire population mysteriously vanished? Well, it depends. Prior to World War II, probably quickly move in. These days, well, there's a rather large number of Irish people living in the UK. So probably a lot of them would go home and reconstitute Ireland. And a lot of the expatriates would go home, and Britain would assist them in rebuilding their country. So, Lepanto, 1571, Nick Fields, the Madonna's Victory. It's an interesting book to have. But mostly, it's interesting because of the detail for me was about the Hospitallers. And that sort of was really something which I sort of picked up and went, that's interesting. It's got some pictures in it. Honestly, some nice ones. But it's done in modern style, so they're in the centre. They're glossy, but they are in the centre. And maps. In centre. Nice paintings. Some satellite photography. In Malta, the wars of religion reached their climax. If both sides believed that they saw paradise in the bright sky above them, they had a close and very intimate knowledge of hell. This is from Earl Bradford's The Great Siege of Malta, 1565. One of the most peculiar organisations in the world today is the Order of Malta. The Order is at once a lay religious order of the Holy Mother Church, an aid body that runs soup kitchens, homeless shelters, health clinics, hospitals and ambulance services in 120 countries, and a sovereign entity that issues its own coins, stamps, vehicle registration plates, and passports, enjoys the United Nations observer status and diplomatic relations with 104 countries, though few of the key ones, such as the United States, Russia, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, for example. Yet, believe it or not, it has no country to call its own. The medieval origins. The tiny southern Italian sea town of Amalfi left a lasting imprint further east, in Fatimid territory no less. Around 1023, merchants of the Duchy of Amalfi Ducato di Amalfi, obtained from Ali Azaya, the 7th Caliph of the Fatimids, the authorization to rebuild a combination church, convent, and hospital dedicated to St. John the Baptist in Muslim Jerusalem, with the understanding that the hospital would admit pilgrims of all religions and races. Jerusalem was a city which offered little commercial advantage beyond the trade in increasingly improbable relics. Still, an obsession with the Holy Land was one of the marks of the age, and as agents of the Abbey of Montalcino, the merchants of Amalfi made it possible for the Benedictine monks to provide care for the poor, sick, bar lepers, or injured pilgrims, regardless of their nationality, faith, and gender, who in growing numbers set out from Europe, often by way of the ports of southern Italy, for the Holy Land. In the wake of the success of the First Crusade, the first rector, Gerard de Amalfi, later Blessed Gerard, founded the charitable brotherhood of the Hospital of St. John, or Hospitallers, into a strictly constituted religious body subject to the jurisdiction of the Patriarch of Jerusalem. The monastic Hospitaller Order was formally named and recognized on 15 February 1113 in a papal bull, P. Postulato Voluntaris, issued by Paschal II, thereby establishing its sovereign status by proclaiming it was independent of both lay and other religious authorities. Since crusading was, to say the least, violent by nature, the Hospitallers were soon to acquire a military bent, as they strove to defend pilgrims and conquer territory from the infidel Muslim. Raymond de Puy, who had succeeded Gerard in 1112 to 1123, adopted a new rule and constitution which was of a more open Augustine nature, with its emphasis on personal responsibility for salvation and good works, compared with the relatively cloistered Benedictine rule. The new office of Constable of the Hospitallers was created, and by 1126 the military development of the Hospitallers had begun. Raymond thus assumed the title of Master and recognized the reorganized the Hospitallers on a military basis in accordance with the Western European feudal principles, but without renouncing its original philanthropic role, at least outwardly. The Hospitallers took a further step in the militarization process on 20 February 1131, when Innocent II issued his circulator, Quam Annabis Deo, which formally assigned them the duty of defending the faith. The sick are being administered a thousand kinds of services of charity. Those who are harmed by manifold constraints and dangers are getting back their old vigour, and in order to enable them to visit the places which were sanctified by the life of our Lord Jesus Christ on earth, the brethren of this house are always prepared to risk their life for their brothers pilgrims from the attacks of the infidels on their way to and fro. These are the people who God uses to cleanse the Oriental Church from the dirt of the infidels and to fight the enemies of the Christian name. Nevertheless, it is hard to exaggerate the importance of the care of the sick in shaping the character of the Hospitallers and in distinguishing it from their rivals, the Knights Templar. The rules of the Hospitallers were amended to include the defence of the Holy Land, and that the members wore the sign of the cross on their cloaks. With the Knights Templars, they became the most important representatives of the Crusade ideology, wielding their swords against their rival Muslim faith in the heart of the Holy Land. This also explains the fervour with which feudal Europe supported them financially and morally. Thus, from its small beginnings, the hospice developed into the monastic chivalric order of Knights of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem, Latin, Ordo Fraterorum Hospitalis Sanctus Ioannis Hierosolymi, also known as Knights Hospitaller or Hospitallers for short, and its fighting monks later defended Rhodes and Malta from the Ottoman Turks. Continuous line stretches from the 11th century to the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, now currently based in Rome, from where it continues its humanitarian tasks in most parts of today's world under several different names and jurisdictions. A legend reports that the Amalfians were within Jerusalem when it was besieged by the armies of the First Crusade in 1099. Ordered by the Muslims to throw rocks at the crusading rabble outside the walls, they were forced to comply. Miraculously, the rocks were transformed in mid-air into bread rolls and fed the famished Christian army. The truth was, of course, that the Amalfians flourished when they avoided taking sides in conflicts between Christians and Muslims. That's cool.
Knights of Front, I have no idea. Probably, because I don't see why they wouldn't be. So why would they not? Here's the question. You said, would they be friendly to the British? Why would they not be friendly to the British? Ireland is currently friendly with Britain. We have fairly good relationship going with them. We have some issues, but on the whole, most issues we resolve quite nice and quite diligently and equitably. Good one. See, Clarke, question 8. Alex, if the USN Nimitz appears as per final countdown of Hawaii in 1941 but does not return, did the USN keep it in commission until it runs out of supplies, or 2, immediately tear it apart to use the tractor in the Manhattan Project? They wouldn't use the reactor, use the stuff in the Manhattan Project, so they'd probably keep it in commission, and they'd probably try and give it supplies. So they'd probably try and keep it going. It would just be far too useful to get rid of. There again, if that's the Nimitz, yeah, it'd be better if it was the USS Enterprise sent back, because then you have 8 reactors to pick from, so you take one off and you leave the other 7 there. With the Nimitz, you have 2 reactors aboard, so if you nick one, you've cut yourself down quite dramatically, and they can't really replicate the power. But there again, they don't need to. You see, you're thinking of just taking off the reactor and looking at it. If you've got the Nimitz as per final countdown, you've also got all the crew. And think how highly qualified and trained all the nuclear engineers aboard the Nimitz are. Think of how qualified and highly trained they are. You would probably would leverage some of them off to help with the Manhattan Project, but that would be it. It might save you a lot of trouble in the Manhattan Project, because they might institute some safety measures which would really make your life a lot safer when you're dealing with all the radiation, and would shortcut some of those problems. Not really. Honestly, again, this is going to sound terrible, 968, for everyone saying this because I'm British saying this, but in my experience, there's a lot of noise made by a very small minority who like to still be resentful over stuff done in centuries past. But the vast majority of people alive today do not bother about that. That's not gonna, in nicest way, that's not gonna cause Ireland to be suddenly the Irish under this scenario where the Irish population has suddenly all disappeared for some reason, and so the expat community or the people who are working abroad have returned home to try and get Ireland working again, to suddenly go, you know what, we're going to be very anti and upset with the British. No, it's just not going to happen. Mainly because they wouldn't need to. Look at the priorities. What's the priorities going to be? It's going to be getting the country working again. So that means they're going to need help in that. They're going to need, well, not just money, they're going to need to have assistance, they're going to need to encourage immigration, probably, to fill up some of the systems. They're going to need to do a thorough investigation of where all those people went, There's going to be a huge legal mess to try and work things out. It's going to be an absolute nightmare to sort out internally. So they will need as much help as they can get. So that help's going to come from Britain because we're the right next door neighbour. It probably would also come from America, which also has a large Irish expat community. And it's one of those things. What I would say is you do find, in my experience, the grudges tend to be held on to more in communities which are not part of the main community. I uh, I have teaching students have tended to have more invective over Cromwell come from Irish American students, let's say, than Irish students when I've taught that particular point. In my personal experience. I'm not saying that's the case for everyone, I'm saying that's the case in my personal experience. In a limited experience, in a limited scenario, I had more invective and upset over Cromwell come from the Irish Americans than from the Irish. There would be a massive amount of shock in Britain, and there would be a massive amount of outpouring of support and taking care of them, and doing the best we could to help. Let's say similar as today. If the Channel Tunnel was completed in 1980, that just probably boosts trade, like it did today. Might actually be running. It might have actually boosted high-speed rail in the UK and had more of that done in the 1990s. Well, there'd only be one wave of aircraft in the nicest way. If Nimitz is around, a la that scenario just early as postulated, then there's going to be no Japanese carriers left, and honestly, their aircraft are going to be wiped out, and that's probably going to end the Pacific War very, very quickly. Because if the Japanese launch only one wave of aircraft and then they lose their aircraft, then think about it. Nimitz can then race at full speed across the Pacific, and probably intercept the invasion of the Philippines before it gets there. Which means Philippines doesn't fall, and if Philippines doesn't fall and Pearl Harbor and they've lost all their aircraft carriers, then probably the attack into Malaysia doesn't happen, in which case Japan is now back in its box at the beginning of the war. And that's before you get the fact that, let's be honest, we're talking again about nuclear weapons, it depends when Nimitz goes, because she could be carrying nuclear components. In which case, the bombs could be delivered very early on to stop the war. Hopefully not. Hopefully it would be the sheer loss of all those things would cause it to not happen. So, Roger Knight's Convoys. It's an interesting book. It's the British struggle against Napoleonic Europe and America. And it's a rather interesting discussion of this Age of Sail convoys. Again, I don't agree with everything that's written, but I think it's a very good starting point and a wonderful thing to consider. Chapter 9, The Battle of the Baltic. Timber, hemp, wheat, 1807 to 1812. We are mostly employed conveying large bodies of merchant vessels through the Great Belt. An arduous service, the passage was so swarming with privateers and rowboats, at one time, with over 400 vessels under the charge of the hero, ourselves, 2 frigates, and a bomb, we never saw the head of the convoy from the time of leaving Wingo Sound. We had charge of the rear. This is midshipman John Harvey Bottler aboard HMS Dictator, a 64-gun ship, in June 1810. Of the 2,000 ships which entered the Baltic this year, not one was neutral. All were sent by the English. All were loaded in London, loaded on English account. They were, it is true, disguised under American, Spanish, or Swedish flag. They had papers and dispatches of each country, and perhaps full certification of French consuls. Certificates manufactured in London. Napoleon to the Tsar of Russia in 1810. It's always nice to know what Napoleon thinks, but honestly, they usually just traded on the British flag and were allowed in. The number of convoys and the ships within them sailing to and from the Baltic, mostly via the large anchorage outside of Gothenburg, were by and far the most numerous of any organised by Britain, doubling the next largest those to and from the West Indies. Moreover, this number was achieved without sailing in the 3 coldest months of the year, January, February and March, when ice prevents entry into the Baltic. The safest and largest convoys took place in midsummer. For instance, in July 1809, 6 convoys escorted 720 ships back to England. A huge expansion of trade in 1813, following Napoleon's Moscow defeat, resulted in vast convoys. In April, Commander Thomas Renwick, HMS Mercurius, an 18-gun vessel, who from 1808 until the end of the war did nothing else but convoy ships to and from the Baltic and Archangel, conducted in safety a fleet of between 400 and 500 sail through the Sound under a continuous fire from Kronenberg Castle. In June 1813, Captain Samuel Butcher, HMS Antelope, 50 guns, took 332 to the Baltic, 209 back again, and 142 to the Baltic again in October. On the 29th of October, the tiny HMS Cherokee, with only 10 guns, Commander William Ramage, brought back 366 from Gothenburg to England. Ramage had been promoted from the lower deck and made commander in 1807 by St. Vincent because of his superior merits and ability. The same could be said of many officers and seamen escorting convoys in the North Sea and the Baltic. Heavy concentrations of merchant ships tended to occur in the Sound or the Great Belt. In 1810, Count Bernadette, on his way to take up the Spanish throne, crossed the Great Belt on the 14th of October 1810, with a British permission. In the middle of the belt, near the island of Spro, 2 homeward convoys met 600 bound for the Baltic. Bernadette's Swedish yacht passed close to HMS Victory, 100 guns, flagship of Vice Admiral Sir James Saumarez, and 6 other ships of the line, protecting over 1,000 merchant vessels, flying a multitude of national flags. Saumarez's biographer claimed that Bernadette thought that it was the most beautiful and most wonderful sight that he had ever beheld. The strategic and financial importance of the Baltic led the government to position a considerable fleet in the Baltic under Saumarez. He reached Gothenburg to take up his command in April 1808. Before the end of the year, his naval force had increased to 11,000 men in 11 ships of the line and 2 64s, 4 frigates and 10 sloops, as well as bomb vessels, a total of 44 warships, which by 1809 had risen to 62. Most of them returned to England each year during the icebound winter, giving ships and men some respite. Saumarez's task was to block Napoleon's influence, bottle up the Russian fleet, maintain good relations with Sweden, resist the Danes, and in doing so to keep the trade flowing backwards and forward to Britain. When Napoleon forced Sweden to declare war on Britain, the Commander-in-Chief's common sense and diplomatic finesse maintained very good informal relations between the 2 nations, which were formerly at war. In Sweden, even today, Saumarez is highly regarded, having protected the country from both Russia and Napoleon. One of the functions of the Baltic convoys was to protect the transports and victuallers that supplied Sunrise's warships, a task which tested the organisation of the British Navy to its full. The most difficult year was 1809, when naval and mercantile resources were tightly stretched across Europe, facing crises at Corona in Spain early in the year, and demand for unprecedented numbers of vessels to transport and supply the Walcheren expedition at the end of it. Demand for ships was so heightened by the recovery of trade, so that hiring transports to supply the Baltic fleet was difficult. However, by 1810 the organisation of the transport and victualling boards proved to be more than adequate, and, as we will see, the capability of had far-reaching strategic results. Saumarez and his fleet remained in the Baltic until 1812, when Napoleon's disastrous defeat in Russia led to the unravelling of the continental system and the reduction of his influence, allowing British warships to be moved elsewhere, primarily to the North American station. It's a very, very good book. It is. Honestly, if you are, well, what you could do if you have that is you could drop, instead of targeting a city, you could target the one of the with the weapons and the skills you have on Nimitz in 1980. If she was in that scenario, you could probably target where the battleships are anchored and sink all the battleships. And if you sank all the battleships with a nuclear bomb, that might well make the point. The thing is, ideally, you'd want to strengthen the peace party, which means you need to actually sink the ship. You need to either sink the ships or destroy the army. The army are the war party in Japan. The navy, especially if they've lost their carrier battle, their carrier for the Kido Butai, and they've lost their invasion force of the Philippines, they're probably already looking for a way out. And if you take out the army, I'm not sure where you could take them out and how you could. It's where there's a concentration off of the army that you can do enough damage that you can take them out in one hit. Interesting to think about, really. It's a war game, that one. Right. I will say this is not going to go on massively late because you can probably hear my voice is already starting to go because I've been, as I said, was not well Thursday, Friday, and still not 100%. But also I've now done lives, streams on Twitch Friday, Saturday, Sunday because I needed to catch up and needed to get some in the bank for what was coming up. And I've done, of course, this is my second live of YouTube on this weekend. So yeah, my voice and I've recorded some videos this morning as well. So my voice is starting to go, helpfully. So I'm going to do about another, well, I'll do 3 hours, so I'll do about another 15-20 minutes. If you sink the Japanese Navy with tactical nukes, then Germany's going to be having a panic attack. Because also, if you think about that, if you knock out Japan out of World War II in 1941,
So basically, they launched their attack in December 1941, and you knock them out of the war before 1942 even happens. So they're knocked out in December 1941. And that's what you're basically talking about. Then Germany's currently in a lot of trouble because all the issues which cause the British to have to send resources to the Far East don't happen. So you have troops still. You have the main focus is North Africa, and then everything's just focused on the European theatre. Well, the trouble is, if you hit the General Staff building in Tokyo, George Newman, you could potentially do that, but you definitely can't use nukes for that job. You'd have to use conventional weapons, because otherwise you risk the damage of hitting the Emperor. And the one guaranteed thing you can do is if you kill the Emperor, Japan will fight to the bitter end. So you can't risk killing the Emperor, and any good intelligence psychological profile will tell you that one. There is a reason the bombing and the cities that are chosen are chosen. They are ones where it's very unlikely the Emperor is going to be anywhere near. Yeah, the surface commanders with BG-199 would have at most 150 kiloton effect if there was on a megaton-sized warhead in service with Monte Carlos. You don't need one, though, for that kind of mission. Take care, Tanef. Marcus, mother-in-law just tripped the breaker box. Enjoy. And that is the other thing, because if you consider it, once you dealt with Japan, you could then bring Nimitz could come round through the Indian Ocean. I don't think you want to take it through the Suez. You take it straight up the centre of the Atlantic. So round Africa, throughout the Atlantic. And yeah, then you might do a decapitation strike on Hitler. Probably not Nuremberg Rally. You'd want to hit him when he's on his railway train or something like that. That's when you want to hit him out, or take him out. There couldn't be Rapid Razorback. You know, there are Axis forces deployed to the Far East to work together, but basically, when they have German and Italian and Japanese submarines operating in the same waters, the rule is you can't do anti-submarine warfare on submarines because you could somehow attack one of their allies. And that just doesn't work. That just means you become prey to British submarines in Indian Ocean waters. It's more important is the Emperor the reason in Kyoto is not targeted. Yep. Why wasn't that? So a unified structure is never really possible. Also, there's the fact that let's look at the Allied Forces of Cooperation. At all levels, you have agreement that British officers coming, British or other Allied officers coming in command of American forces, American officers coming in command of other Allied forces. It works. They just work it out. You have the very real scenario that in North Africa, you have arguably the Italian general, some of the Italian generals deployed are better commanding, are better officers, and are better at their job. But Rommel has to be in charge. And he provides less troops, often than the Italians, and not always as capable as the Italians, depending on the mission. So it's a very different scenario, the relationships between the Axis powers as between the Allies. It would be interesting, 9603. A nuclear-powered CVA-01 would be an interesting scenario, and as said, I think, honestly, the Royal Navy would have been better going for a nuclear-powered CVA-01. I think they're more likely to have got it, considering the government mantra at the time was on showing Britain to be the most powerful they could on the minimal possible budget. And one of those things is status. And I'd argue the Queen Elizabeth carriers we've currently got are as a way are part of the government, British government, and a continuing British government as are. Okay, the British government doesn't want to spend money on defence because they always prefer to save money and spend on the better projects, but they like to have status. They like to have the ego of being a major power. Not a superpower, a major power. Please note there's a clarification of difference. A major power is basically a medium power with global reach. That's a major power. So they like status assets. Hence the carriers. They're good, they're useful. Please don't get me wrong, I want them. But that's the reason they got built. And that's also the reason why you'll probably have next generation main battle tank built in Britain. You will do, because having a main battle tank is a status thing for the army. Let's be honest. You can argue that, like the US Marine Corps, a British Army which is an expeditionary focused force may not be able to really justify a main battle tank force. But you can also argue it's very useful. I prefer to have them, but you can argue against them. The same argument can be made as the US Marine Corps. Well, under that circumstance, there should at least be discussion going on in Britain, but there isn't. Let's see, Clarke. So, given the earlier question on the Nimitz line 1941, does the US building the nuclear-powered battleship based on the Nimitz reactor? I don't think so, but I do consider probably Britain and America both build nuclear-powered carriers. Because you think, if World War II ends in 1941-42, think about what happens to how the world changes if World War II ends in 1941-42. Think, Hitler declares war on America. War ends in 1941-42. Think how different the world is. Think how many lives are saved. How much money is not spent. How much damage is done less. We're upgrading to Challenger 3. It's not being built, it's being upgraded. But there's the next generation tank which comes after that. So why didn't the RN ever get their own TICO variant? The British TICO equivalent is probably the Bristol class, HMS Bristol. That's the probably similar level of destroy. Basically, the TICO is a destroyer rebranded as a cruiser, and the British left theirs as a destroyer. Jacob, I don't think Britain would ever want to go for German-built vehicles. That's been a major sticking point with Boxer, and one of the reasons why Britain is ordering as many Boxers as it is, and it's requiring its own independent manufacturing capability. And that adds expense to it, because there are issues with Germany
in terms of sometimes they will say they just won't supply you for the parts, because they'll supply you the equipment and go, look, we've given you this great equipment, and then they go, oh no, we don't like what you're doing, so we won't supply you spare parts, and that's a problem. So it's a case of, I have great respect for German engineering. They contribute some really, really interesting designs and really capable equipment. But you've also got to function in your functional organic ability to do stuff. And if the Germans don't want you to do it, then there's problems. And that's one of the reasons we've seen in Ukraine is being that the German political scenario is a lot more complex than it's often portrayed as being. Okay, please note it's not they're not owned by Russia or any of the various weird things you see, but Germany's in a very weird political position because they banked everything on getting to green energy. They got rid of nuclear power as quick as they could in response to the accidents in Japan, because they suddenly went, oh, how this can be really dangerous. Well, yes, we all know they can, but in a nice way, you're not on the same fault lines and issues as Japan is, and your reactors are in a very different situation, but it's your justification for getting rid of them. Okay. And to cover that, they went on, all right, now we're going to have to go with gas energy to give us enough power to get us through, which has made them incredibly dependent upon Russia. They made a gamble. They made a gamble that Russia wouldn't do anything too bad they couldn't live with before they had got to enough level of green energy, enough level of renewables, i.e. wind, solar, etc., that they could sustain themselves without it. Trouble is they haven't got there. And this has happened. So they failed on a gamble. It happens. But it does complicate your politics and your strategy. Thank you, Bob Fry. And oh, Britain's been building new factories. That's what we've done for the. That's part of the cross. The Ajax program has been building a new factory in the UK, and so far finding that all the hulls which have come from the Spanish factory have been interesting. And that's mainly because the Spanish are used to building their model of the Ajax to the Spanish requirements, which is a different measurements, not quite the same measurements as the British one. And so all the hulls are wrongly shaped because they're a mixed match of the components, and it's a case of, oh yeah, because you get used to building it in a certain way. Should modern cruisers, Ian Morrison, should modern cruisers be built in a modern fleet? I would argue that most modern warships built are cruisers. They're just anti-submarine warfare cruisers, i.e. frigates, or anti-air warfare cruisers, aka destroyers. I would argue that most modern escorts built are variations on cruisers if you look at their roles and the capabilities built into them. The old Sea Vixen isn't much to write home about, but for its time it had a very, very good radar. And a surprisingly capable turning ability to turn. It's a very manoeuvrable aircraft, and it looks gorgeous. That's the other thing about the Sea Vixen. It does look gorgeous. Remember, if the war ends in 41 or 42 and Hitler and the Japanese army are still alive and in charge, the structural causes of the war are still in place and stand as plans. In the nicest way, the war only ends if the Japanese army is not alive in enough level to be in charge. And remember, they've just had their entire fleet handed to them, so the peace is not going to be beneficial for them from a naval perspective, so they ain't going to get on with anything else. And I don't see how you end the war in Europe in 42 without killing Hitler. I just don't. So Hitler's dead. It happens, Calvin Gosberg. Germany has a very strange relationship with nuclear power. Pardon me earlier, but I think I burped a couple of seconds ago. This is the trouble. I've had to survive off mostly a liquid diet for the last couple of days. Thank you, Verdun. Which has not been necessarily the most pleasant thing. Right then, as said, it's 3 hours, so I'm going to say last questions, and then I'm going to say goodbye and good night. And I will see you on Thursday, which will be the last, the last live for about until the following Sunday. Because it won't be next Sunday, it'll be the next Thursday, it'll be the following Sunday. Because I'm away, being a course director and looking after A-level and GCSE kids who are revising and trying to prep for their exams. So, thank you HMS Verdun for being a supporter, and thank you Stafford, member for 4 months. Actually, speaking of that, and thinking about sort of that sort of scenario, let me go to not that. We need. There needs to be 6 more members, and we get the 13th emoji. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Yes, there are 12 emoji currently, and at 6 more members, I get there's the 13th, and I think at 18 more members, I get the 14th emojis. So I have to start figuring those out. But thank you very much for all the memberships, because I have noticed that there is a big link between memberships and YouTube promoting videos. So thank you for that. Thank you, Jerry. And thank you. It wasn't that you. Thank you. That's all I'm going to say. Just thank you. I was just telling you all that we were sort of that many away from a new emoji, because I know some of you do sort of message me about it going, will we be getting a new emoji soon? I peaked at one point at 104 members. And we are now at roughly 60. Which is a nice number. Thank you. Now just one more. Yeah, okay. You want the 13th emoji. I will come up with the 13th emoji. Thank you, Tashi Rochelle. Thank you, DG40. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Neil McCall, Alfred, 8228, and Ken McGuire. Thank you, everyone. So, thank you, everyone, for being here. And I will inform about my colouring experiments, Carl. That's what I meant. The senior Japanese military lieutenant Hitler have to be unalive for the war to end that early. Yes, and that's pretty much what you have to do. And I think USS Nimitz could probably do that. Nice hearing. Would the British keep a company blacklisted indefinitely? Certainly some parts of the Ministry of Defence have occasionally tried. Failed, but tried. Thank you, Stafford. Thank you, Jack Cray. Thank you, Abuzaski. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everyone, for your support. The super chats, the memberships. Thank you, everyone. That's really helping out. Thank you. And thank you, Runon.
Bad Guy 8829, Ian Morrison, John Shea, Dep Squad, Joss Vonks, Carl McGasberg, nice to everyone. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you, Newhouser S, DG40, Marcus, or AK 4KIYON. And thank you, Alzaski. Thank you, Steve Clarke. Thank you, HMS Verdun. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, everyone. It's really very kind of you, and your support is really, really greatly appreciated. Thank you, everyone. Stafford, thank you for perhaps the class can crowdfund a cooking class for Sis. My mum is trying. She has been trying for the last goodness knows how many years. She's still trying. My mum is one of the best cooks I know. And occasionally my sister is very good, okay? It's not as bad as it used to be. It used to be every single meal would result in something. Now it's rare. It's getting worse the individual occasions when it does go wrong, but it's rare. So it's less common, but worse when it happens. Maybe that's because we've lost the resistance we'd built up to it because of the greater frequency. I'm not sure. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone, and take care. See, Clarke, that's just Nimitz is still alive. Does he command the ship with his name? Probably. Probably they invite Admiral Nimitz aboard, because let's be honest, he would love it! And he could command it for everything from there. Take care, everyone.